GA4 is intimidating, especially, a small business owner. It's not necessarily going to be easy to set up, but I do think it's valuable to maybe take some time to learn to set it up, maybe at least to get some basic events and conversions firing. That being said, I think most businesses are going to have, if it's a small business, they might not be able to afford like a HubSpot or that sort of thing. But I do think if you have some sort of CRM, some way to pull in, like if you have UTM parameters attached to your ads to be able to pull in the sources, making sure that you have that data flowing in. I do think that's crucial.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Tim Jensen and I were both at the Brighton SEO Conference, and that wasn't just SEO at the Brighton Conference, so I'm super excited to chat with him about what his session was, what he covered in his session. So, Tim, thanks so much for joining me. You're, I guess, active in media and analytics for M&T Bank, right?
Yeah. Thanks again for having me. Excited to be here. So yes, I work on the paid media team here at M&T Bank. So managing what we're doing across search and social ads, and also quite a bit of interfacing back and forth with the analytics team, reporting and setup in that end as well. So yeah.
Great. So what was your session at Brighton?
So I had a session the first day in which I talked about PPC reporting, and dealing with changes from a data standpoint. So anyone in PPC, or frankly in digital marketing, we're dealing with the fact of cookies going away, marketing getting a little messier with model data and such. So talking about ways to deal with that and being able to communicate to your clients in the modern format of how things work there. Then actually also the second day, I was able to participate in an analytics panel, touching a lot on the transition to GA4 and how to approach that for digital marketers.
Well, there's one thing that's sort of been a common theme, probably a little bit more so within Google and reporting than Microsoft Bing and Microsoft advertising. But in both cases, and some of it is systemic, which is this idea that the level of granularity and the level of census level data as opposed to model data seems to be continuously evolving towards more opacity instead of more transparency.
Yes.
And so, we have to deal with that. It started way back even before keyword not provided, but that was a big blow to the industry, right? So we were like, oh no, we don't know for sure what keyword it was. And then, little by little, things have moved more towards pre-aggregation of data and, sometimes obfuscation of data. So what was your takeaway? Like, how should marketers who got used to having fairly granular level of detail, losing some of that, how should they deal with that?
Right. Yeah. I think one of the takeaways I led pretty much right off with was, we just need to accept that our data is not 100% perfect.
Right.
It's not going to be. I think one of the biggest mindsets to have going forward is to look at GA4 is intimidating, especially, a small business owner. It's not necessarily going to be easy to set up, but I do think it's valuable to maybe take some time to learn to set it up, maybe at least to get some basic events and conversions firing. That being said, I think most businesses are going to have, if it's a small business, they might not be able to afford like a HubSpot or that sort of thing. But I do think if you have some sort of CRM, some way to pull in, like if you have UTM parameters attached to your ads to be able to pull in the sources, making sure that you have that data flowing in. I do think that's crucial.
Should I be turning right to keep myself in the lane or left? And sort of as you're driving media, you're sort of along those lines. You take all the signals you can, you take your best guess, and you just try to keep the thing going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think having multiple sources of data is helpful too. At the end of the day, you probably do have to settle on one source of truth, whether that's your CRM, analytics platform, but making sure that you are tracking in your ads platform, you are tracking in the analytics platform. Depending if you're ecom, probably your ecom backend or lead gen, your CRM. Making sure you have sources going in there properly. So you have multiple sources to compare. That's important as well.
So for folks who are struggling with whether or not they want GA, now that Universal Analytics is gone and it's GA4, where they're not necessarily sure they want to use GA4 as their sort of single source of truth for the perspective of how they steer their campaigns, how should they go through about their thought process of deciding, is it my backend business intelligence? Is it my CRM? Is it my e-commerce platform? As to where that data lives.
Sure. I mean, again, I think a lot of it comes down to your business, your technical resources within your business and what you have. I mean, GA4 is intimidating, especially, a small business owner. It's not necessarily going to be easy to set up, but I do think it's valuable to maybe take some time to learn to set it up, maybe at least to get some basic events and conversions firing. That being said, I mean, I think most businesses are going to have, if it's a small business, they might not be able to afford like a HubSpot or that sort of thing. But I do think if you have some sort of CRM, some way to pull in, like if you have UTM parameters attached to your ads to be able to pull in the sources, making sure that you have that data flowing in. I do think that's crucial, whatever analytics platform you're having that you have in place. So so again, like whatever platform you use, if you can settle on having info flowing into your CRM to match against leads, I think that's the best approach.
Right. One of the other things that's sort of challenging for a lot of marketers, as certain of the sort of bidding engines, particularly the ones that are built into the various platforms, are becoming more of a AI-driven black box. They, of course, may have back-end business intelligence KPIs that are a little more sophisticated than the sort of front-end cost per lead or ROAS number, or where they understand the LTV. Either it's the LTV of a longer-term e-commerce customer or the LTV of a longer-term banking customer that is more valuable, either because they keep their deposit accounts longer, or they keep larger deposits, or they have a greater breadth in the case of banking of banking products, right? So I happen to have an M&T mortgage, but I don't have an M&T bank account at the moment, right? So I'm probably not so exciting to M&T as I am to Citibank, right?
Sure.
Where I have more things, right? Or Chase. So somewhere in some back-end system, I look different to those two entities. And sort of from a marketing perspective, the marketer always wants to try to find more of those power customers, right? The ones that are in the 80-20 rule. They're the ones that generate a lot of profit or a lot of revenue long-term to the customer. But it's not always easy to get that information into the front-end bidding algorithm, right? So that the bidding algorithm can cherry pick out the Kevin Lees in the ecosystem intelligently.
Yes.
So how should they think that through? Like, okay, my back-end system, whether it's a CRM or an ERP, sort of can model out what a Kevin Lee looks like, but how do I get that information out front where the media is getting bought?
Sure. Yeah. And it is a complicated world with the bid landscape and the data that Google actually shows you. I think first party data is crucial. And thankfully that is something that most businesses, you are still able to feed that to the ad platforms on some level, whether that's manually exporting your leads and uploading it, or using a tool to sync it to the platform. So segmenting out lists of current customers, like it might be a list of high value customers or customers that have a propensity toward certain products, certain characteristics, however you define that on your back end. You can feed the system with that. Like, for example, Google's new demand gen ad format, which replaces discovery, runs on like different Google properties. They're rolling back out a lookalike functionality. They had done away with their similar audiences, but that can play off of a first party list and find people with similar characteristics. Meta, LinkedIn, all the big players have some equivalent of that where you can upload a list and build a lookalike off of that. So I would say thinking about that first party data that you can sync to the platforms and upload, especially as more people have ad blockers and such that are blocking tracking codes that are able to add them to traditional remarketing lists. iOS restrictions are preventing people on devices from being added to lists. So that's again where first party data comes in handy when you have a way to match those people. Enhanced conversions also on Google from a tracking standpoint are kind of a way to beat that. Again, not that's going to be perfect, but that's kind of a new method that they have for setting up conversion tracking when the tracking script might not be firing right. It just picks it up based off of what people input into a form. Kind of going in a couple directions there, but some different routes that the audience can think about.
Yeah. And I love that focus on first party data because if it wasn't this year that was the year of first party data, I think next year should certainly be the year of first party data with the full deprecation of third party cookies, right? I mean, cookie apocalypse starting in January. Right?
I know. It sounds like Chrome is. I know they've been hanging it over us for a while. Sounds like they might finally be pushing it out of Chrome.
Right. And one thing that's fascinating about that, from not only our financial services clients that did it, but for many others, is that oddly enough, one area where you can still use highly granular data is in direct mail. So we found that we can still append a tremendous amount of information onto web data and integrate web data and direct mail together. And, during the pandemic, direct mail started working again, right? The snail mailboxes were empty and, sure, postal rates went up. But the reality was if you hyper-personalize direct mail, it works pretty well. And I know
we do a lot of it. Yes.
It works. I mean, just based on the amount of mail that I get from credit card offers and from banks, it must be working because there's just a tremendous amount there.
And it's interesting too. I think many people may not think about the crossover you can do with digital. Obviously you have the challenge with first party data. It does have to be people that are opted in at some level, but there may be like a similar demographic, similar area that you're covering, or people who have opted in that you can kind of hit them in both digital and traditional means. So figuring out overlap wherever you can and not keeping those buckets and silos is helpful too.
Yeah, for sure. And one of my favorite targeting levers that's still available if you're willing to set the campaigns up that way is geography, really geographies, right? I mean, zip codes tell you a tremendous amount about a person who's likely to be in that zip code from a residential basis, right? It tells you about their wealth and their income and the likelihood that they own their house versus rent their apartment, right? All that information can be really useful from a modeling perspective in increasing the odds you're going to get the kind of person that you want.
Right. Unfortunately, Google just hit us with it's like a consumer finance bucket that's kind of broaddening out. So no more zip targeting for anything in that category. There's a few others. That's
for the financial services category has been much more restricted with regards
to other industries where you are able to do that. That can be a very helpful route. I know that like the household income layers too, that can kind of pinpoint those areas.
So you'll have to go back to direct mail again. Where you're still allowed to do that. You're still allowed to know where
there's other ways around it in the digital world, but
So there seems to be almost a little bit of a divergence between sort of some of the things that Google is doing within their sort of Performance Max campaign or AI versus some of the things that Microsoft Ads is making available. So do you have any thoughts about sort of, obviously they don't always have the volume in Microsoft to be able to deliver, right? But sometimes people leave that out. And I sort of feel like, well, it's big enough. You got to put that into your campaign. So do you have any thoughts as somebody who's sort of probably managing them in parallel?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think people often overlook Microsoft when, again, I've personally seen it hit or miss. I've seen some brands where it just doesn't work, and some where it performs great, but often you'll have less competition there.
Yeah,
The bids will be cheaper, and you can see decent performance there. And they have all or most of the features Google has. They usually play catch up if Google adds something. I mean, you can sync first party audiences like we were talking about in there. Another thing that's interesting for anyone in the B2B world, they have a certain amount of LinkedIn criteria there that you can layer onto campaigns, which that's, Microsoft owns LinkedIn. That's something Google doesn't have, is that level of B2B granularity.
right.
So yeah, I would agree. Definitely test it. Make sure you've set up your tracking and everything specific to that first. The audience network, I know some people seem to get it to work. I've always struggled a bit there. So that's something I would maybe kind of watch, maybe you can get it to work for your brand. But I know like the audience network is opted in to by default. There are ways around it, like having reps exclude it. So that's maybe just something to watch there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a higher level of granularity in Microsoft advertising with regards to what you want in and out of your extended network. So that's,
Yes, yeah, you can control yeah, excluding partners. Yeah.
right. So, what were some other conversations you had when you were at Brighton that you thought were really interesting? Maybe they were outside of your usual, role and responsibility, but over drinks or at other sessions, you sort of had some really cool takeaways.
Sure. I'm always kind of geek out in the analytics end of things, even though my main responsibility world is paid search. So yeah, I think there were some interesting insights about just kind of diving deep into GA4 and some of the capabilities that you have there. I think there's been a lot of reluctancy, understandably, but myself included, to really dive in and learn it. But like the level of control that you have to be able to build out custom reporting really is something we did not have
Mhm.
in UA. So I think that was one area that was interesting to dive into.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a sort of a love-hate relationship with the sort of GA4 deployment, because there are things that are missing that people used to like, and then there are some things that if you dig deep enough, you can build within GA4 that wasn't around before, right? So
Right. Yeah. And I know some may have seen by the time this is released, but they recently announced Google Signals, having that on by default is kind of going away, which hopefully will help with some of the thresholding issues people have seen. So I know that's been a pain point where there's thresholding on data and you're not actually seeing everything if you had that turned on previously.
yeah, I think certainly the extent to which data is modeled as opposed to census level data can be, I think some people still like to have census level data, and will
Yeah.
probably have to rely on other reporting and analytics platforms if they want that level of granularity.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, pulling
Um,
into BigQuery and stuff, you can get more detail as well.
right. So with regards to the fact that contextual inventory, particularly within Performance Max, but also elsewhere, seems to be increasingly commingled with search clicks. Do you feel
Yeah.
like they're not giving the right level of control to the marketer with regards to that kind of inventory?
Um, it's it's a complicated world. I mean, I remember the days where you literally had to set up every single keyword you wanted and it wouldn't even account for misspellings or that sort of thing. So there's some benefits, I think, from automation where the level to which you build out your paid campaigns is in some senses less complex than it was before. You really don't need to, nor should you have like hundreds of ad groups with like really closely related keywords. On the flip side, even exact match keywords, which previously only matched like that literal phrase, are going to match to like a whole bunch of different things, which sometimes Google's smart about it, sometimes not so much. That's something that you have to watch. going to your question with formats like PMAX that kind of mix search and other channels, it's definitely a challenge, especially when you don't have those levers to pull, like where it's spread out, or like, I mean, we do have more exclusions now, at least, like if people did want to exclude brand, but, setting up a vanilla campaign, you don't have like brand versus not, or remarketing versus not. So it definitely gets messy. It does seem like on some level they're maybe listening and adding a few more levers to pull. And sometimes, unfortunately, I think it comes from bad press and noise that happens, like the recent search partners issue, where it sounds like they're giving us a search partners exclusion. I am interested to see like other campaign types, which right now they do let you build an actual dedicated search campaign, dedicated display campaign, discovery, shifting to demand gen, separate campaigns. If eventually we lose those levels of control, which hasn't happened yet, but a couple of years from now, I could see that happening. A few things to watch.
Yeah. So any thoughts as to within display in general, not just necessarily display that's running within Google,
Sure.
a GDN, or eventually if they merge it into PMAX, about how AI generated or AI enhanced creative, particularly as it relates to dynamic creative optimization, may change the way that works. Do you think that's going to be a positive, or do you think that being a black box is actually more of a negative for a marketer?
Good question. I think it's kind of a mix. It is interesting, on the Google front, ever since they've had the option for responsive display ads, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time, frankly, sometimes junky looking responsive ad outperforms any amazingly designed static ads I had.
Right.
So there's definitely something to the system being able to know, I'll combine this image, this text, put it in front of this person at this time. And if you're feeding a good conversion data, it'll convert. That being said, especially when it's like a full black box, whether, whatever programmatic platform you're using to place the ads, where, there's a lot of junk in the inventory of sites where those are showing up, and, who knows how your brand's going to appear. I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing for the web as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And also myself, speaking from being in an industry that's heavily regulated, a lot of watchfulness within the organization, and outside from what we have to deal with for how ads look, it does make things trickier for us even to stand up a campaign to say, okay, here's all these possible variants for how an ad could look, but we don't always have control here. So I think for industries like that, the platforms that do give a little more control are going to be an easier sell internally too. Kind of a different angle from straight up performance or that sort of thing.
Great. So back to sort of a B2B context, or it could be B2C for anything that's a high involvement or longer term conversion cycle purchase, right? So this could be, in the case of mortgage or credit card, it could even be potentially banking, where a person isn't actually finishing the setup of an account online, and it may require sort of a lag. So there's sort of different schools of thought as to, well, do I use the business intelligence I have to essentially score that converted lead, right? As soon as I get the PII, and say, okay, this has an 87% chance of closing with a lifetime customer value score of 8 out of 10, right? Even though that might be wrong, that's what your model currently says. So you could use that to optimize, which allows you to start optimizing quickly, right? Versus waiting to see what actually happens, which in B2B can sometimes take a long time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then using the real data on that lead to optimize. Any thoughts about how people should think that through?
Sure. Yeah, I worked a lot in the B2B world when I was agency side. I think if you're going to get into lead scoring, that needs to be based on actual organizational data and not guesswork. I've seen it work well. I've seen it work not so well. I've seen it where it's, just super arbitrary, where someone that seems like they're really qualified title from a really qualified brand is like, well, they still have to click this many blog articles or watch this many videos or whatever to be able to be tagged as a prospect to justify us even contacting them. So I think lead scoring can work well, again, if there's a thought process where you're actually looking at your back end data. But other than that, I think, going back to ad platforms and, kind of feeding the system, if you're sending back data or, multiple stages, and the platform knows like this person did the first step, second step, third step, and each of those is valued at a different level, and that's something that can, inform the bidding, where it can actually bid more aggressively for those people that have reached that later step. So yeah, all that to say, I think if you thought through the process and it's actually based on your business data, roughly the value that you're assigning those different stages, it can be helpful.
Yeah. What about the sort of gulf or increasing gulf between sort of the data, first party data halves, which tend to be the bigger companies, right?
Yeah.
They have a back end system. They reach critical mass from a statistical validity perspective much more quickly. And as you go down towards the SMB, you end up with, the S's of the SMB, where it could take them a month to reach statistically valid data samples, right?
Yeah, so that's a great point.
How should they think, if you're, depending on where you are at that curve as a search marketer and as a digital marketer, your options are more limited, right? I mean, you can run an experiment as a larger financial services institution, have a result in 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
You can't even run that experiment as a small credit union. It just take too long, right?
No, that's a great point. And that first party data, like you say, even having lists that are big enough to target, and I think there's a gulf between even, like a platform might technically take a list of 1,000 people, but is that really enough people to even get you anywhere with building a decent lookalike and targeting, like to the point where you probably want 10,000 or more to be at a starting point for building a decent lookalike. So I think in that case, I think again, like maybe start building up those first party lists. So maybe you have them once they're large enough, but maybe then it's time to look at other routes for targeting for what the ad platforms let you do. And there are some interesting routes like Google's custom segments, where that can work for like discovery, demand gen, display, YouTube, where you can put in like a list of keywords or websites that people might be interested in. Sometimes it gets matched kind of broadly, so you kind of have to experiment it, but you could put in like a list of competitor sites or that sort of thing to target. Or if you're B2B, go on LinkedIn and look up groups related to what you're trying to target. So I think for those SMBs, realistically, they might not be at a place, like you say, where those first party lists are big enough, and maybe they need to try to test some other routes to targeting. In market segments or another, in both Google and Microsoft, that can get really specific, where you might be able to find your people that you're trying to go after.
Any other recommendations of what you think folks should focus on in 2024, just based on having looked at a lot of campaigns in your experimentation phases, agency side, now your client side, so you've seen a lot. So, and any thoughts of issues you've seen over and over again, or areas that you think people don't put enough attention into?
Sure, I would go back to GA4, where obviously where that is what Google Analytics is. But if you're not, I know there are some other routes people have gone with other analytics platforms that they're paying for, but GA4 is still free. So maybe taking a bit of time to learn it, and even if you're not a GA guru, maybe making sure you set up like those basic conversion events and that sort of thing. On the ad platform end, I think we're moving increasingly, not that we haven't been for the past several years, toward consolidated campaigns and a lot more automation. So just becoming comfortable with the fact that we have the black box, we have automation, we probably need to be testing these newer campaign formats that are coming out, but still looking for levers that we can pull. And then finally, I would go back to that first party data point for businesses that do have first party data that's at a size level where they can sync it to platforms, sync those lists wherever possible. If you're able to segment them, do that as well, like segment high value customers or different products and services, and then use that to kind of seed the system for targeting.
Were there any other speakers at Brighton or sessions at Brighton that you thought were particularly enlightening?
Let's see. There was a paid session at the very end of the last day where there was some, good discussion around kind of the mix of like dealing with automation, PMAX world, and then even like some of what we talked about with reporting. So it's interesting to hear from friends in the paid social end of things, Akfila, DeFazio, Andrew Foxwell, to hear what's working for people that spend a lot, and Meta and platforms like that. Meta in particular can be a challenging platform to get working properly. So that was helpful too.
Yeah. One of the things that people don't realize is you can sometimes get B2B to work pretty well in Meta.
Yes.
You think of Meta as just purely a B2C platform, but if you tune the settings right, you're reaching humans, right? So the human may have a personal hat and a business hat, and we've been amazed in some cases at the scale that we can get out of.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like you say, I think people stereotype certain platforms as working for certain types of people. But yeah, syncing, either your B2B audiences or there's really a decent set of B2B targeting criteria that you can dig up in there also. Just thinking about the context of, it's not an ad appearing in a LinkedIn feed, it's appearing in Meta, Facebook, Instagram, and such. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with the audience, and look forward to keeping up, and maybe we'll see you at Brighton next year.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.